of the history of this particular building. Okay? And remembering it is just a building, but as we heard across the way, it's a living building because people come here week by week to worship. So it's a very interesting building, but it is just a housing really. So welcome to St Mary's Church. Oh sorry, I'm Jacqueline Baker. This is my husband David. As Dom said, we are ex-church wardens. I don't know quite how, yes, anyway. So this is the ancient parish church of Walthamstow. Up until the mid-1800s, it was the only church in Walthamstow. There wouldn't have been other churches. The parish of Walthamstow spread all the way to Tottenham, to Woodford. It was an enormous area. And it was only as more people moved into the area, the railway came, houses were built, that more churches then sprang up around Walthamstow. Many were planted by St Mary's, being the church that was here. So, whistle-stop tour of 900 years of history. William the Conqueror gave land to his supporters. One of those was Ralph de Tony. That was William's standard-bearer. The land he received included the settlement of this part of Walthamstow, as I said across the way, which was later to become the hamlet of Church End. That land was then passed to his son, who was also called Ralph, when he married Alice, the Conqueror's niece. Very incestuous. Ralph de Tony, that's the younger Ralph, founded this first church. But it wasn't a public church, it was a manorial or a private chapel, just for the use of himself, his family and his household. And that was in or around 1108. We can't be specific, the documents are very old, some dates don't align, but it's around 1108, which is a date we like to hang on to. When Ralph de Tony the Younger died, his wife, Alice, granted this church to Holy Trinity Priory in Aldgate. And this is what it says in the will: for the salvation of the soul of her husband. But this was common practice at the time for the rich to ensure that they didn't spend too long in purgatory whilst waiting to be admitted to heaven. Because it's important to remember, as I was saying to someone across the way, that at this time the church would have followed Roman Catholic traditions. The Anglican Church, the Church of England, had not yet come into being. So this was originally a Roman Catholic church, hence its dedication name, St Mary's. And it was given that name of St Mary about 30 years after it was founded.
We're going to talk a little bit about the building now that we see around us. The original building would have been a Norman building, and that certainly wouldn't have been as large as it is today. The Normans, they would normally build a stone church on the site of a previous Saxon church. The previous Saxon church would have been a wooden building, and nothing of that remains. But the Normans would have built the church on the site of a previous Saxon church. The original church would have been roughly the size of the columns at the back, where the double doors are, through to the clustered column that is just there. That would have been the nave of the church. So the size of the original church would roughly have been a rectangle from the clustered columns here through to where the door is now. And there would have been a chancel which would have extended back beyond here to the back columns that you see here. So roughly, that would have been the size of the original stone building that the Normans would have worshipped in. In the 13th century, the north and the south aisles were added, and they were made of medieval flint. The tower was added later in the history of the church. It wouldn't have been built with a tower. We don't know when the tower was built. It simply isn't recorded in the documents when the first tower was built. The earliest evidence of a tower is in 1431, when it's recorded in one of the wills that money was left to refurbish a bell that was damaged. So we know that there would have been a tower in place before 1431 but we don't know exactly when it was. The tower was built of white Kentish ragstone, the base of which could be seen today. And if you look at the back now, on either side of the door, you can see a white stone, and above the white stone, you can see medieval brick, Tudor brick. The white stone is the original foundation stone of the tower, and we're going to hear in a minute about when monarchs rebuilt the tower. In 1535, when monarchs was living, the tower was in a state of disrepair, and serious work was needed doing, and George Monarchs, a Bristol merchant now living in Walthamstow, knocked down the old tower to its foundation stones and paid for the rebuilding of the tower and of the north aisle. So the church is beginning to take shape, the side aisles are added, the tower is rebuilt, and we come to Monarchs' contribution to the life of the church.
I'm sure you've all heard of George Monarchs. There's the Monarchs College going down towards the billet. So this puts it in context who George Monarchs was. George Monarchs was a Bristol merchant, as David said, and not only did he pay for the tower to be rebuilt, he also paid for the north aisle, but he also added on this corner here a chantry chapel, which is very similar to what Ralph de Tony's wife did about praying for the soul of her husband, that a priest would pray for Monarchs' and his family's souls after death, so they wouldn't spend too long in purgatory. Now this was around the time of the dissolution of the monasteries, 1535, 1540. This is when Henry VIII has broken with Rome, and there are new traditions in place. But George Monarchs held firm to the old tradition, the old church. And it does seem, from reading other things, in minutes and other documents, that Walthamstow was quite a conservative, with a small c, area, and that it hung on to those old traditions for quite a long time. It didn't go with the new religion. So Monarchs didn't embrace the change. And it's also, the other interesting thing about this chantry chapel, which was here, it was a separate chapel, but when they built it, something went wrong with their plumb lines. And that end is 6 inches wider than the other end. And if you're interested, we can show you later how you can actually see that in today's church. Okay, it's a little misalignment there. It's one of those little quirky things. Monarchs in 1527, so prior to the aisle, the tower and the chantry chapel, he'd had those almshouses built that you walked past as you came through to the churchyard. The priest, who was going to pray for his soul, doubled up as the schoolmaster. There was a room along the top. That was the schoolroom. That was the very beginnings of the George Monarchs School. So it has its foundation in 1527, as my husband will tell you as an old Monovian. Yes. Now, in 1535, there's another man, Robert Thorne, another man from Bristol, never set foot in Walthamstow, but had friends here. He left money, and they rebuilt this aisle. So this aisle is rebuilt. From the 16th century, the population of Walthamstow changes from mostly farmers, but there's now a few more wealthy people moving in. And this is reflected in some of the large monuments and memorials that you can see around the church. Sometimes they have memorials, like this one up here, Mary, Maynard, Lucy Stanley, the big one at the back Trafford that we don't talk about because it's ugly and horrible, but also these large ledger stones, brasses. There's some brasses over on that side of the church. These were people who had money. So, Mary, for instance, he lived where the William Morris Gallery is. He lived in the previous house called the Winds, hence why those roads are called Winds Avenue and Winds Terrace. The house was called the Winds. Thomas Merry lived there. In 18th century, some galleries were added all the way around the church. But you'll now see that the gallery only goes 2/3 the way around, and that's because in the Second World War, an incendiary bomb hit the south roof, and they used the wood to repair the roof. Obviously, materials were in short supply. Gallery was never put back, thank goodness, because it would be so dark in here, and it is rather lovely. The sun streams in on that south side.
You can see the line of where the old gallery went. Can you see there's a line in the wall? That line in the wall indicates where the gallery would have gone and shows you the scale and the extent of it. In the 19th century, the columns were cut down to the octagonal form we see today. So they were cut to this shape. The Victorians did that. And that's quite useful because the bases of some of the pillars, you can still see where the chisel marks, if you look at some of the pillars just there, and that side there, you can see where the original stonemasons' chisel marks are still there, and they are very, very old. They're 12th, 13th century. The reason they stayed is because the Victorians put box pews at a high level, so that when you sat down now, no one would be able to see you. In the old days, they had box pews, and it was only when you stood up could you see out of the box pews. You can see where the box pews would have been by the lines on that column there. The box pews would have been that high. So during the course of a service, when people were sitting down, you couldn't see anybody. In the 20th century, the wooden panelling around the church was placed as a memorial to those who lost their lives in World War I, and there's a monument just there, a memorial just there. And new pews and other furniture was added between 1904 and 1922. In 1936, the east wall, the wall along here, was found to be cracking. And there was a major structural fault with that wall. So that wall and the window that was there, as a large rose window, that was all taken down, and the wall was relocated 12 feet further down, and a new wall and a new window was added. So at that time, the church has become the shape that it is today. That window was added in 1937, and it represents the Te Deum, an ancient Christian song. The window was designed and made by the very famous stained glass company Powell & Sons, Whitefriars, and a small white friar, the company's signature, can be seen at the bottom right of the window, and if anybody is interested and there is time, we can show that to you afterwards.
At the end of the 20th century, so we're coming right up to date now, some of the pews were moved at the west end, making a better welcome area. A new audio-visual system was installed. We have a screen here that is moved out for services, so we very rarely use books. Everything is onto the screen. It means we can see videos, we can just see lots of things. The foundations of the West Gallery were reinforced because the gallery was seen to be a bit dodgy. The oak timbers in the porch were rediscovered. They were from Monarch's time, so those oak timbers, as you go out, look up, they're from 1535. They are still there, they've been treated, and they still hold the tower up. The tower has needed no major work doing on it for nearly 500 years. 500 years, quite amazing, quite amazing. And in the 21st century, the Peal of 10 Bells are being refurbished as we speak. They're in Loughborough, there are no bells at the moment, but we hope that many of you will come back and join with us to celebrate when the bells return in September, when we will have some events planned. So you'll see that over 900 years of history, each generation has adapted the building to meet its own needs, altering and growing the space to make it fit for the purpose for which it was intended, the worship of Almighty God. And we're done.